How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi, host of Tier Talk, and today we're going to be talking about touring inmate dorms. So, I didn't put sugar in my coffee. That ruins your whole day. Just ruins your whole day. I like my coffee light and sweet. That was nasty. Touring dorms. This was actually suggested on one of my videos that I do a video on touring dorms. And we did a video on touring pods, which, again, when we're talking about touring dorms, we're talking about literally these officers are out there, and it's sad to say, probably by themselves, touring an open area of beds with inmates. The number could be 70, 80, 90, 100 inmates, no barriers. And it's probably one of the most dangerous posts in corrections. One of my most scariest times was actually on an inmate dorm. So when we come back from our sponsors, I want to talk about what should be best kept practices for touring a dorm. But I also want to talk about the confidence for an officer. I mean, when you walk in a dorm and you got these inmates, the amount of inmates can be somewhat intimidating. It's like walking an active yard or walking into an active mess hall. You're seriously outnumbered. And our greatest fear is always going to be that inmate unity. So what I want to discuss when we come back from our sponsors is not just best kept practices for touring a dorm, but I also want to talk about the confidence. You know, what an officer needs to do to maintain that confidence, but not just internally. I'm talking about what we can do to help that officer maintain their confidence. So when I come back from our sponsors, we're going to talk about touring a dorm. Now, guys, if you haven't, remember, this show's for you frontline men and women who work in corrections. You know, so if you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. That bell's going to notify you every time I post up a video. I stand by for our sponsors.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Being a corrections officer takes its toll on even the strongest individuals. The constant need to perform at the highest level, putting your life at risk in a hostile environment, and the mental scarring of traumatic experiences. 31% of corrections officers show symptoms of PTSD, and 66% of people with PTSD also suffer with a substance abuse problem. The Transformations First Responders program is specially designed to help veterans and officers heal from the grips of addiction and PTSD in a comfortable, supportive, and serene setting. You are not alone. If you have questions about the services we offer, give us a call at 866-762-8454 to get more information on this affordable and life-changing program.
Thank you guys for listening to my sponsors. Dorms are probably one of the most toughest, scariest posts for a correctional officer. You know, our biggest fear is inmate unity, and with social media nowadays, it happens a lot now where inmates unite on what they feel is a good cause, and then they get that push from the public that justifies it for them. So you may have one inmate that has a foolish cause, and then all of a sudden the public support, and now other inmates may latch on. So we're always concerned about that inmate unity, but if you have controlled areas like pods, you can create the barriers that can stop those inmates from uniting and kind of overwhelming staff. In dorms, you can't do that. Dorms don't have the barriers. So in most cases, unfortunately, because facilities are understaffed, you're going to probably get one officer touring that floor by themselves with no one overseeing them in a secured area. That's a scary thing. And that officer may be responsible for another dorm. So they may leave that one dorm unsupervised and go to another dorm. That's how scary corrections has become. Technically, the standard should be, because you have an open area, I don't care what shift it's on, whether it's an earlier shift or a later shift, when there's an officer in that dorm, there needs to be two. Automatically. There needs to be two officers walking the floor at all times. And that's just so they can have each other's back, be an immediate response for each other. And just so if the one officer by chance has to put his attention on something, then he can devote or she can devote 100% of her attention on that one thing, because the other officer will kind of look at the environment and just make note if there's any threat and obviously alert the officer. But you also have the overseer too, the officer in that control point. Now, even though there are no cells here, you still have the access and exit from that dorm. So usually, again, same thing as a pod, that overseer may be charged of 2 different dorms. I would say no more than that. But they can kind of see things from above and just make sure that both the officers are okay. But the reason why you want to have 2 officers on that floor, one thing, as I said, for immediate safety for each other, but also to give confidence to the officers so they can do their job. Imagine walking a dorm with 70, 80, 90, 100 inmates or more and trying to go after that contraband or trying to regulate these inmates. Just going into that dorm is intimidating. It is. You're seriously outnumbered. Now you have to enforce the rules, but you're wondering if something was to happen, who has your immediate back? Providing that second officer can provide the first officer with the confidence needed so they can be effective. And that's what we should promote. You want the officers to have confidence. You don't want them to feel or be seen as vulnerable. So that second officer can provide the first officer with the confidence needed to be effective, to go after that contraband, to address the inmates when they're doing something wrong. Now, my advice in a dorm is if you have to address an inmate, there should be a safe area to do that. You're not going to address an inmate in front of their homies. You can't do that. That's a danger for any officer who tries to do it, because that inmate's going to want to try to save face. They're not going to let themselves be belittled, or whatever the case may be, or how they feel they're being belittled in front of their homies. So if you have a problem with an inmate, obviously walking a dorm, you're going to want to say, "Excuse me, sir, can I talk to you for a second?" and be able to bring that inmate into a secured area, enough to where the other inmates can't really see, but they definitely can't hear what the discussion is. Usually when you pull the inmate away from their homies, they're a lot more easier to manage. Not all the time, but it's just a better practice than just kind of going at them in front of their homies. One of the concerns with dorms is the inmates that are classified to those dorms. So anybody that works classification, in my opinion, should at least get a view once of what these dorms look like and how the officer maintains control in those dorms. Because I believe for dorms, the officers and the supervisors, the frontline staff, if you're going to place an inmate into my dorm, the frontline staff should be able to maneuver where that inmate needs to be. And again, that's in accordance with the officer and the supervisors. I don't think that the classification department should just blindly put inmates into a dorm. I think that the frontline staff should be able to determine where that inmate needs to be placed in accordance to how they're trying to make it as safe as can be for their officers. Classification also needs to listen to staff if they say, "Hey, this guy's not a good fit for this dorm." And the reason being is because not only are we looking to protect staff, we're looking to protect those inmates. So I'm going to kind of go to gangs here, because gangs have that automatic unity. You know, so when we talk about inmate unity, we always have to be concerned that inmate unity can be created by us. If we rile up enough inmates, they're going to unite. Could be created by one inmate who just gets people to stand behind his cause or her cause, or it can be created already coming in by race or gangs. And that puts the officer at an incredible disadvantage. It's an incredible disadvantage. So when you're placing inmates into a dorm, it's good to have that communication between the supervisor and classification. That's why it's great to have supervisors, custody supervisors, sit in on these meetings, on these classification meetings, because they can make a good determination based on, okay, I think this inmate's a good fit for these reasons, or I think this inmate will be a bad fit for these reasons. How the officers set up their dorm, this is where the greatest conflict is. Because in order for an officer to protect themselves, it goes in direct conflict with how an officer should protect the inmates. So of course the officer is going to take the sacrifice here, but it's the truth. The officers will take the sacrifice here and situate the dorm in a manner that protects the population first. And that's the sacrifices that we make. And let me explain that. When you're walking into a dorm, you may see that some officers, even in a pod, if they have to house rival gangs or people that just rival based on race, they're forced to put those inmates together. So Bloods, whatever set here. Sometimes Bloods or Crips, they rival each other. So they try to put the inmates that get along together in the same areas. And they have to do that. They have to do that for safety and security of the entire dorm. So I have the Bloods here, whatever set, the Crips here, whatever set, the Serenos, Norteños, AB, whatever the case may be. And they start having their own position inside these dorms. Now the conflict here is that's sort of as best as we can manage at this point, because we have open dorms, because this is not 100%, guys. You have to realize that. But we're forced to do it. We're forced to do it because it's just where we have to place the inmates. We have no choice. But there becomes an accepted lifestyle on that inmates that are in the dorms. Like, these are our areas. Don't go for the other inmates. Don't go into our areas. We won't go into yours. Unfortunately, officers do have to regulate that a little bit, because we don't want those inmates having total control of those areas that they're trying to take as their own. You know, especially if it's a public area that has to be shared. So if it's their bed area, that's different. You know, no inmate should be in another inmate's bed area. We know that. But you really shouldn't have inmates taking control of the public areas, like the TVs, the phones, you know, so forth and so on. But with that said, the reason why it's done that way is because if you mix them, you're going to be putting inmates' lives at risk. So look at what the officer does. The officer automatically puts themselves at risk because they have no choice, and they kind of bulk the inmates together that kind of are most likely going to get along. And again, that's for the safety and security of the facility, but that's a sacrifice that we make every day that no one realizes. So the officer is going to go into these inmates' areas seriously outnumbered. Seriously outnumbered. But what are they supposed to do? That's the conflict. The conflict I remember having, even as a supervisor, is always with the gangs. You put them with rival gangs, you're putting their lives at risk. And if you group them together, you're risking the life of the officer. But we step up and we make that sacrifice. I wish the public knew that, because they don't. And it's never mentioned anywhere. I think this may be the first time that's ever mentioned. But it's a hell of a sacrifice that these officers make every day. It really is. Because that is a scary moment for an officer to be walking by each area. But again, the officers should be seen as that neutral individual. Like, you know, if the gangs have issues, it's with each other. The officer's kind of that neutral individual. And it is expected from those inmates, because they're conditioned to that lifestyle, that the officer is going to go into those areas. The officer is going to do their job. That is their job. That's what they're getting paid to do. So most of the time, the inmates have been conditioned to that. But again, nothing's 100%. And shit can go wrong, especially if that inmate is looking to protect contraband. That's why you need to have that second officer to have the other officers back. You know, there's some cases where, in some states, where the inmates are allowed to watch the officers do the searches. And I did a video on that, so I'm not going to go into detail on that. But the reason why you want to have that second officer on the floor, especially in dorms, is why that officer is paying 100% to that search, the other officer can check the environment. You cannot do a search effectively if I have to look at what I'm searching and be weary of what's going on around me. I need somebody to have my back, but I need that backup to be immediate to me. It makes me feel more confident. I would also like to see in dorm settings frequent visits by supervisors, but be careful how you do. You don't want to open up that door constantly either. That's another thing with dorms. Once the officers get locked in, and again, yes, the officers have to get locked in. It's another sacrifice they make. They get locked in with these inmates on the dorms. You want to try to limit how many times you open that door, and you definitely don't want a pattern that's predictable, because the inmates are going to understand that pattern, and then if they decide to take something over, it's going to be quiet until that moment they know that you're coming at this set time, and then as soon as you come, they bum rush the door. So you want to kind of come sporadically where it can't be planned, and also try to limit how many times that dorm door needs to be opened. Try to limit how many times it's got to be open, and definitely some good communication with that control point who opens the doors. Get our back. If I'm on the floor, get my back. I may call for the door open, but I may not see something. You have the greater perspective. Don't open the door, because ultimately you're the one to open the door. If something happens, you will be held responsible. Sure, there may be something held or pushed back on the officers on the floor, but you have the greater perspective. You are the one that's in charge of that button. You are the one that should make sure that environment is as clear as possible, and if not, radio back to the officer on the floor saying, hey, not a good time to open that door. So again, I definitely feel there should be more visits from supervisors in dorm settings, just to kind of have that presence. And if we want to, again, build confidence to the officers, put that second officer on the floor immediately. I'd love to see more officers, but we're not going to get it. Put that second officer on the floor immediately. That should give the officers some confidence, help them be effective. And guys, it's scary to walk a dorm. It's intimidating. It is. But the inmates, trust me, just as much as you may be a little scared or taken back, so are the inmates, because they're also outnumbered. They're scared. So at the end of the day, it's about what we do with that fear. Does the fear motivate us? Because that's the test. Or does the fear make us freeze? We need to do what we can to motivate our officers so they don't freeze. And that second officer on that floor can motivate them to do that job, to do what they're supposed to do. To have that officer's immediate back would be that officer's motivation to say, yeah, I'm afraid to walk in here, but I do my job. I do my job because my partner's got my back. That's the key. So again, double officer on the floor, good relationship with classification, making sure frontline is involved in how those inmates are placed, the sacrifice we make, as I mentioned, we're forced to kind of sacrifice our safety for the inmate's safety. And if you guys have to comment on it, please comment on it, because that's the truth, guys. But comment on that. I'd love to get your perspective on that. And I think this was a great topic, and I think we could even go more into this. Maybe I'll bring someone on the show one day who's worked a dorm and maybe give us some just dead-on advice, advice from someone with experience. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. Love you guys. If you haven't, guys, the show's for you brave men and women that work that front line. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. That bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. All right, guys, stay safe.